At my engagement party, my mother-in-law stood up and announced, "This wedding won't happen because I have a better bride for my son." I thought she was joking until she introduced the woman standing next to her. My fiancé's next words left her screaming. I still remember the exact moment it happened, the way the room fell silent, the sound of someone dropping their fork onto a plate, and the way my heart started pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. My engagement party was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life. Instead, it turned into a nightmare I never saw coming. It all started when my fiancé, Daniel, and I decided to host a small engagement party at a beautiful venue just outside of Chicago. We had invited close friends and family, people who had supported our relationship and were excited for our future. Or so I thought. Daniel's mother, Margaret, had never liked me. From the very beginning, she made it clear that she didn't think I was good enough for her son. She would make passive-aggressive comments, compare me to other women she thought were more wife material, and constantly undermine me in little ways. I had tried so hard to win her over, thinking that maybe, eventually, she would accept me. But I was wrong. So very wrong. The engagement party was going smoothly at first. The food was great, people were laughing, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself to relax. Then, right before we were about to cut the cake, Margaret stood up, tapped her glass with a spoon, and cleared her throat. "Excuse me, everyone," she said, her voice loud and confident. "Before we all get carried away celebrating, I have something important to say." I felt Daniel stiffen beside me. His grip on my hand tightened, and I knew, deep down, that whatever was about to happen wasn't good. "This wedding won't happen," Margaret announced, smiling as if she had just given the most wonderful news. "Because I have a better bride for my son." The entire room fell into a stunned silence. Some people gasped. Others whispered. I let out a short, breathless laugh, thinking this had to be some kind of joke. And then she stepped aside, revealing a woman standing next to her. I didn't recognize her at first, but the way she smiled at Daniel made my stomach twist. She was tall, blonde, and absolutely stunning, like someone you'd see in a bridal magazine. She wore an expensive-looking dress and had the kind of confidence that told me she knew exactly what she was doing. "This," Margaret continued, placing a hand on the woman's back, "is Vanessa. She is smart, comes from a good family, and, most importantly, she truly loves my son." The audacity. The absolute insanity of what was happening in front of me made my brain short-circuit. I looked at Daniel, expecting him to shut this down immediately. Instead, he did something that I will never forget. He let go of my hand. Margaret beamed, thinking she had won. Vanessa smiled even wider, tilting her head as if waiting for Daniel to come running into her arms. But then, Daniel spoke. His voice was calm, but there was a sharpness to it I had never heard before. "You finally lost it, haven't you, Mom?" The smile on Margaret's face faltered. The color drained from her cheeks. What did you just say?" Daniel turned to the guests, shaking his head in disbelief. "I want every single one of you to witness this," he said, gesturing toward his mother. "Because this right here, is why I've spent years keeping my distance. My mother doesn't love me. She loves control. And now that she sees she can't control me anymore, she's pulling this stunt." Margaret's hands started shaking. "Daniel, honey, no," he interrupted. "You don't get to talk. Not after what you just did." Vanessa, who had been standing there awkwardly, finally spoke up. "Daniel, shut up," Daniel snapped, turning to her with a glare so cold that she physically stepped back. "I don't know what kind of arrangement you made with my mother, but I am not interested." Margaret looked absolutely stunned. Her eyes darted around the room, as if searching for someone to back her up. But no one did. "I am marrying the woman I love," Daniel continued, reaching for my hand again. "And if you can't accept that, then you are no longer welcome in my life." The room was so silent, you could hear Margaret's breathing become ragged. She looked like she was about to explode. And then, she did. Margaret let out an ear-piercing scream of pure rage. "You're making a mistake," she shrieked, grabbing the tablecloth and yanking it so hard that glasses and plates crashed onto the floor. People gasped, jumping out of their seats as the chaos unfolded. "You are throwing your future away for her," she screamed, pointing at me like I was the devil himself. "She is nothing." Daniel let go of my hand and took a step toward her. His voice was low, but filled with so much finality that it sent chills down my spine. "No, Mom," he said. "I'm finally free." Margaret's face twisted in horror, realization finally sinking in that she had just lost the war she had been fighting for years. And then, she did something none of us expected. She grabbed the engagement cake. And threw it. At me. The entire room gasped as the cake hit my shoulder, sliding down my dress in a disgusting, sticky mess. I stood there, frozen, as Daniel lunged forward, grabbing his mother's arm before she could do anything worse. "Get out!" His voice was like a whip. Margaret looked around, wild-eyed, breathing heavily as if she was about to faint. She turned to Vanessa, expecting her to say something. But Vanessa was already stepping away, looking completely horrified. Margaret turned back to Daniel, her lip trembling. "You're my son," she whispered. "You don't mean this." But Daniel just stared at her, unmoving. She let out one last desperate sob before storming toward the door. No one tried to stop her. No one even looked at her with pity. And just like that, she was gone. But little did we know, this wasn't the end. Because the next day, Margaret did something even worse. I woke up the next morning still feeling the dried cake on my skin. No matter how many times I washed up, it was like I could still feel it, sticky, humiliating, a reminder that my future mother-in-law had publicly tried to destroy my engagement. Daniel had stayed with me the entire night, holding me close, whispering apologies, even though none of this was his fault. He kept saying he would fix everything, but I didn't think there was anything to fix. His mother was out of control, and at this point, there was no coming back from what she had done. But then, my phone started buzzing. It was early, too early for anyone to be calling me. Confused, I reached for my phone and saw hundreds of notifications. Missed calls, texts, voicemails. And then I saw the messages. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then, my heart dropped. Margaret had gone online. And she had posted the most horrifying, disgusting lies about me I had ever seen. She made me look like a monster. There were Facebook posts, long dramatic ones, where she played the victim, saying I had stolen her son, manipulated him, isolated him from his family. But it didn't stop there. She made a fake story about how I had been cheating on Daniel the entire time we were together, claiming she had proof that I was only after his money. She called me a liar, a gold digger, a heartless woman who had brainwashed her son against his own loving mother. And people believed her. Relatives, old friends, even strangers were commenting, calling me disgusting, saying Daniel needed to wake up before it was too late. I even saw messages from people I had never met before, some telling me I deserved to be dumped, others straight up threatening me. I sat up in bed, my entire body shaking. "Daniel," I choked out. "You need to see this." He grabbed his phone, and as soon as he saw the posts, his face darkened. His hands clenched into fists, his breathing sharp and uneven. "This is insane," he muttered. "She's actually lost her mind." Then his phone rang. His aunt. I could hear her voice through the phone, loud and panicked. "Daniel, what is going on? Your mother is saying horrible things about your fiancé. She's saying she has proof she's cheating on you." Daniel barely let her finish. "She's lying," he said sharply. "There is no proof because it's not true." His aunt hesitated. "Are you sure?" "She's sending screenshots to people." I felt my stomach drop. "Screenshots?" Daniel put the call on speaker, and his aunt continued. "She sent messages, Daniel. Texts from another man. She's saying your fiancé has been leading a double life." I felt like I was going to throw up. "What screenshots?" I whispered. Daniel's aunt paused. "Hold on, let me send them to you." A few seconds later, Daniel's phone buzzed. He opened the images, and when I saw them, my blood ran cold. They were fake. Texts that looked like they were between me and some unknown number. Messages where I was saying I didn't love Daniel, that I was just waiting for him to put a ring on my finger before leaving him. It even had fake pictures, poorly edited ones of me with some other guy, a person I didn't even recognize. I covered my mouth, feeling sick. She actually faked these. Daniel's entire body was rigid. His jaw was clenched so tight I thought he was going to break his teeth. "This is it," he said. "This is the last straw." He picked up his phone and started making calls. First to his family to tell them the truth. Then to a lawyer. Because Margaret had just crossed the line from crazy mother to defamation and harassment. And then she showed up. Before we could even process our next move, there was a loud, angry pounding on the front door. Boom, boom, boom. Daniel and I both froze. Then, her voice. "Daniel, open this door right now." Margaret. She was here. And she was furious. My heart was hammering in my chest as I glanced at Daniel. His expression was deadly calm, but his hands were shaking from how hard he was gripping his phone. She banged on the door again. "I know you're in there. Don't you dare ignore me." We didn't move. Then, something slammed against the door. Hard. Like she was trying to break it down. I jumped, my breath catching in my throat. "Daniel, I'm calling the cops," he said immediately, already dialing. But before he could even hit call, Margaret screamed. A raw, animalistic scream of pure rage. "You will regret this. Both of you." Then, just as suddenly as she had come, she was gone. We didn't know it yet, but she wasn't done. Not even close. She wasn't done, not even close for the next few hours. I felt like I was living in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Margaret had stormed off after her unhinged outburst at our door, but something in my gut told me this wasn't over. And I was right. It started small. Daniel's workplace suddenly received anonymous emails claiming he was involved in fraud. His boss called him in, confused but concerned, because the emails contained evidence that Daniel had been stealing money from the company. Of course, the documents were fake, sloppy Photoshop jobs meant to smear his name. But the sheer volume of emails, calls, and even social media messages made his boss request an internal review. It's her. It has to be her. Daniel was pacing in our apartment, running his hands through his hair. She's trying to destroy my life. I wasn't convinced she would stop there. And I was right. Because the police showed up at my door. Margaret filed a police report against me. I was home alone when I heard the knock. My first thought? Margaret was back. But when I peeked through the peephole, my stomach dropped. It was 2 uniformed officers. I opened the door slowly. Can I help you? Are you my name? One of them asked. I nodded. We need to ask you a few questions, the officer said, his tone neutral. A report has been filed against you for harassment and threats of violence. My blood ran cold. What? I choked out. Who? The complainant is Margaret, last name. She claims you've been harassing her, sending threatening messages, and attempting to damage her property. I almost laughed from how ridiculous it was, but I couldn't. Because these were real police officers at my door, treating this like a serious situation. She's lying, I said immediately. She's the one harassing me. She showed up at our house just this morning, banging on our door and screaming. The officers exchanged glances. Do you have any proof? Proof. Of course, she knew what she was doing. She had made herself the victim before I could. She had filed first. I swallowed, my pulse pounding. She's been posting about me online, spreading lies. We'll need to see everything, one officer said. And just to be clear, you are not under arrest. But given the nature of the complaint, we need to do our due diligence. I felt sick. I called Daniel immediately. He rushed home, fuming, and we spent the next hour gathering everything. Screenshots of her posts, texts she had sent Daniel threatening to ruin us, even security footage from a neighbor's camera showing her pounding on our door. The officers reviewed it all carefully. Then, they left, promising to file a counter-report. Daniel exhaled sharply once they were gone. She actually tried to get you arrested. I gripped my arms, my skin crawling. She's not stopping. This is escalating. I didn't know how bad it was really about to get. Then, my job got involved. The next day, I walked into my office like usual, only to find HR waiting for me. Can we talk in private? My manager asked, her face unreadable. I followed them into a small office, my heart already racing. We received an email, my manager began slowly. An anonymous tip claiming you've been engaging in unethical behavior. I blinked. What? The HR rep sighed. It included supposed screenshots of you making inappropriate comments about the company. And, she hesitated. A claim that you've been stealing from clients. I froze. I could barely speak. She's trying to get me fired, I whispered. My manager frowned. I exhaled shakily. This is going to sound insane, but my future mother-in-law has been trying to destroy my life ever since our engagement party. I pulled out my phone, showing them everything. The fake messages, the police report, even Daniel's work issues. To my absolute relief, my manager and HR rep believed me. This is beyond disturbing, my manager admitted. We'll investigate, but we're on your side. If this continues, we may need to take legal action on your behalf. I barely held back tears of relief. But at the same time, I was terrified. How far was she willing to go? I got my answer that night. Margaret broke into our apartment. It was past midnight. Daniel and I were lying in bed, exhausted but too wired to sleep, whispering about what we should do next. Should we get a restraining order? Should we cut off his entire family? Should we move? Then, there was a soft click at the front door. Daniel immediately sat up. Did you hear that? My blood ran cold. Then, the door creaked open. My heart stopped. Daniel moved faster than I had ever seen him move. He leapt out of bed, grabbed the bedside lamp, and ran toward the living room. I followed, my entire body shaking. And then, there she was. Margaret. Standing in the middle of our apartment, holding Daniel's childhood photo album. Her eyes were wild. Her hair was a mess, her clothes wrinkled like she had been sleeping outside. You don't understand, she gasped, gripping the album to her chest. I had to come back, I had to get this. This is proof. Proof of who you really are. Daniel lost it. Are you insane? He roared. You broke into our home. She flinched. Daniel grabbed his phone. I'm calling the cops. Right now. Margaret screamed. No, you can't. I'm your mother. She lunged at him, trying to rip the phone from his hands. I moved instinctively. I grabbed the first thing I could, a candle holder, and threw it. It hit the floor beside her with a loud crash. Margaret stumbled back, eyes wide with shock. "You need help," I said, my voice shaking. "Serious help." Tears streamed down her face. "Daniel, baby, please," she sobbed. "I did this for you. That woman, she's tricking you. She's ruining you. You don't see it yet, but you will." Daniel's face was stone cold. "I see everything clearly now," he said. "And you? You're done." The sound of sirens filled the air. Margaret's eyes went wide. And then, she ran. Straight out the door. We heard her footsteps pounding down the hallway. The police arrived minutes later. We told them everything. But Margaret? She was gone. And she wasn't finished yet. Margaret was gone, but she wasn't finished yet. The police searched the building, the surrounding area, even checked security footage, but Margaret had vanished into the night. No one knew where she went, and honestly, that terrified me more than anything. Because if she had given up, she would have stayed. She would have begged, cried, tried to manipulate Daniel into letting her go. But she ran, which meant she had a plan. And she hit us where it hurt the most. For 2 days. Everything was quiet. No calls. No emails. No insane social media posts. Daniel and I barely spoke, constantly checking over our shoulders, waiting for whatever came next. I didn't sleep, didn't eat much, just kept thinking, what is she planning? And then, Daniel got a call from his father. Now, let me explain something. His father, Richard, had been divorced from Margaret for over a decade. He hated her, wanted nothing to do with her crazy schemes, and always kept a healthy distance from the drama. So when he called, we knew it was serious. Daniel put the phone on speaker. "Daniel," Richard said, his voice tense. "We need to talk. Your mother just did something bad." Daniel exhaled sharply. "What now?" Richard hesitated. "She sold your grandmother's house." The room spun. Daniel's grandmother had passed away years ago, and the house had been in his name. Margaret had no legal right to touch it. But Richard continued, "She forged your signature, Daniel. She used an old power of attorney document from when you were younger, altered the date, and sold the house for cash." I felt sick. Daniel gripped the table so hard his knuckles turned white. "That was supposed to be my inheritance," he whispered. "She took the money and ran," Richard said. "No one knows where she is." That was the final straw. The confrontation. We had to track her down. I don't know if it was dumb luck or her own arrogance, but Margaret wasn't hiding. She was at a fancy hotel in downtown Chicago, spending the money she had stolen, acting like she had won. We walked into that hotel lobby like a storm about to hit. And there she was, sitting at the bar, sipping a martini, laughing with some older man who looked like he had no idea what kind of psycho he was dealing with. Daniel didn't even hesitate. He walked straight up to her, slammed his hand on the bar, and said, "Give me my money." Margaret froze. Her eyes widened, and for a second, she looked genuinely startled. But then, she laughed. Laughed. Like this was a joke. "Oh, Daniel," she sighed, swirling her drink. "You always were so dramatic." He was shaking. Actually shaking. "You forged my signature and sold Grandma's house. That's fraud." She rolled her eyes. "I needed the money." Daniel snapped. "You needed the money? For what? To sit in a hotel and drink martinis with some idiot who has no idea you're a literal criminal." The man at the bar looked uncomfortable and immediately got up and walked away. Margaret sighed. "Oh, don't be so emotional. It's just money, Daniel. You'll make more." Daniel's voice dropped dangerously low. "You're going to give it back." She sipped her drink, completely unbothered. "And if I don't?" I stepped forward. "Then we press charges." That made her pause. "You wouldn't," she scoffed, but I saw it, that tiny flicker of fear. "We already have a lawyer," Daniel said. "We already went to the police. This is your last chance." For the first time in forever, Margaret looked nervous. Her mask slipped, and I saw it. The desperation. She had nothing left. She had burned every bridge, lost everyone, and now? She was cornered. She tried to laugh again, but it was weak. "Come on, Danny. You wouldn't send your own mother to jail." Daniel didn't even blink. "You're not my mother anymore." That broke her. She staggered back, her face crumbling. "Daniel, you don't mean that." He didn't say another word. Just pulled out his phone. And started dialing. "Fine," she shrieked. "Fine. I'll give it back. I'll get the money." Daniel held up a hand. "I don't trust you. We'll do this legally. You're signing everything over, and if I find out you spent a single cent more, I'll make sure you rot in prison." Margaret just stood there. Her hands trembled. Her lip quivered. For the first time, she looked old. Defeated. She had lost. We followed through. Daniel's lawyer crushed her. She was forced to return every penny, and because of the forgery, she avoided jail time by agreeing to never contact us again. She lost everything. Her reputation, her connections, even her family, because nobody wanted anything to do with her. And after that, she disappeared. No calls, no emails, no random appearances. It was like she ceased to exist. And honestly, that was fine with us. A year later, Daniel and I got married. It was small, intimate, perfect. No drama, no insanity, just love. And when I looked at Daniel standing at the altar, saying his vows, I knew we had won. Margaret had tried to destroy us. But in the end, she only destroyed herself.